My sister Angela was planning on being with us this morning. Her daughter-in-law, she called us last week, and her daughter-in-law is due this week. And she was going to come up and stop overnight, go to church, and then head on up to Denver so that she could watch the other kids. But Friday, Kristen, her daughter-in-law, went to the doctor, and the doctor said, we're going to induce you in the morning. And so late Friday evening, we get a call from Angela and say, we'll see you in several hours. So she showed up about 1 o'clock Friday night, Saturday morning, and then got up early and went on up to Denver. And this morning, about 4 o'clock this morning, she has a new grandbaby, a vet, Stephen Hines. And so we're glad of that. That's good news.
It's different.
It is. She lives outside of Austin, and her son and his family live in Denver, and we're kind of close to halfway. And so she stays with us a lot of times, going back and forth overnight. But also, it was a year or so ago, her son Aaron was coming down to visit his mother, and they came down and they spent the night with us. And his oldest daughter's 4 now, I guess, maybe a little, nearly 4, right?
He'll be 4 in
3
July.
kids in 4 years. They've been busy. But the little girl, the oldest little girl, really likes cows, and so she wanted to see the cows. And of course, that always pleases me. I like to show my cows off. But we took her up in there, and we went to a safe spot, and I said, yell as loud as you can, hello girls. And of course, she yelled, hello girls, and she's a little kid and can't yell very loud, and the cows didn't hear her, or they didn't care. I said, let's yell together. And so we both yell, hello girls. And of course, when the cows hear me yell, they come running. And she keeps yelling, and she's convinced that those cows are running for her. She had a good time. But it was just one of those examples where sometimes who is yelling makes a difference, that those cows recognize the voice. And we saw last week with the man born blind that he listened to Jesus. And there was just something about Jesus' voice that made him obey. That he went and he washed the mud off and he gained his sight. And we see that over and over in John. We see right there in the beginning, in the first chapter, that John says to Philip, come follow me. And he does. And then we see the servants at the wedding at Cana, that Jesus says, go fill those jars with water. And they do. The blind man does what he's told. And then we see, oh, there we go, yeah, in John 18, that this is in the trial of Jesus before Pilate. And Jesus says to Pilate, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And we see how important Jesus' voice is. And we wonder sometimes why people listen. But we see in Matthew, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. For he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes. We see over and over that Jesus' voice has power, and that what he says has power. And those that listen to the truth, and those that listen to Jesus, are the ones that are finding Jesus. We also saw with the blind man that he listened to Jesus, and he gained his physical sight. But as he listened to Jesus, he also gained understanding. That he not only gained physical sight, but he gained mental understanding. And not all of them did. And at the end of chapter 9 of John, Jesus is talking to them, and the Pharisees and everyone is not understanding. Even sometimes his disciples didn't understand. And at the end of John, Jesus is teaching, and then he keeps going right on into John chapter 10. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to start in John chapter 10 and read the first 18 verses. But let's keep in mind, it's the same context of that man born blind who can now see, and some of the people are not understanding everything Jesus is saying, and so he's attempting to explain it to them as we go through. This is the passage that is normally called the Good Shepherd, because it's going to talk about the Good Shepherd. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. For he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me. If I lay it down of my own accord, I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I received from my Father." As we look at this passage, we've talked a little bit about how Jesus describes himself in the book of John. He talks about, I am the door, I am the shepherd, I am the light. We go through, we see over and over that Jesus tells us who he is, and he tries to explain to us who he is so that we can know it, because he will know us. As we look at these, one of the things that it talks about is that my sheep will know my voice, and I know them. This was several years ago, obviously, because Daddy had some cows out down there on that tape place on 203, and we shared a fence. And one morning went out, and all of his cows were over on mine with my cows, and they knocked the gate down. They got between them. So I got Daddy, and we were talking about how we're going to get them separated. He says, "Well, if we put them all in the pen, and then we'll separate yours back out into the pasture, and then we'll get the trailers, and we'll move them mine back over to where they need to be." And so that was our plan. But we get out there that morning, and we're going to put them up in the pen. And Daddy says, "Well, let's try one thing first. Before we go to all this effort, let's try this." He says, "You take your pickup, and you go east, and I'll take my pickup, and I'll go west to that gate." And we did. And we hollered, and he hollered, and I hollered, and those cows just split just like this. All of mine went with me, all of his went with him, went right through the gate. There was no problem at all. But they recognized his voice, his cows did. And my cows recognized my voice. And I knew which ones were mine, he knew which ones were his, and they just split just like that, without any trouble. Because they knew who they wanted to listen to. They knew who they wanted to follow. And we knew our cows too. They went both ways. And that's one of the things that we see here, is that Jesus is the shepherd, and he knows his sheep, and they follow him in and out. But it also tells us that not only is Jesus the shepherd, but he also says, I am the door, I am the gate. That he is the one that is responsible for the whole way. It's not just that he's the leader, but the coming in and the going out, he also is responsible for. And I think sometimes we miss that a little bit. We like the idea of the shepherd, because that's throughout the Bible. We know that. The shepherd, the kings of Israel were supposed to be the good shepherds for the people. We read Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. It is throughout the Old Testament, that image of God as a shepherd, as the kings as shepherds. And we appreciate that. But it's not just the shepherd. We also have that vision of Christ as the gatekeeper. That he is there making sure of what goes in and what goes out. Sometimes when I see that, I look at it as kind of a comforting idea that Jesus is the one to protect us from the wolves and the robbers and the thieves. But it says that Jesus is there as the shepherd and as the gatekeeper to lead us in and out. So sometimes I think that we think of that sheepfold and we get to just stay in there surrounded by the protection of Jesus and the hedge and the fences, and we'll be protected. But it also tells us that we will go out. And that's not always very safe. That's not always very comforting. That's not always, it's all sometimes a little bit scary. This is another story. Several years ago, we were living in Memphis, and we went to church one night, Sunday night. And I got a text, and now a lot of times, I know I don't like phones ringing when I'm in Judge or up here or anything, but sometimes they're important. And I looked down, and it was from Tammy, and it said, call me. And, I thought, okay, this is something, that's not our typical message. But I said, well, I'll wait till after church to do that. Because it's probably something to do with court that I need to respond to. I need to sign something tonight. I said, it could wait. But then after church was over, I look again, and this time it's call me, all in caps with an exclamation point. Call me. And I realized that she's yelling at me. So I call her. It doesn't have anything to do with court. But there's a fire out there at Mackinac. She says, the fire is on you, and the wind's out of the west, blowing across. What do you want us to do with your cows? And I said, just to open the gate and let them out. I'll gather them up. But just let them out so the fire doesn't get them. And so Kay and I go. We go right away. And it usually takes about 20, 25 minutes. And it probably didn't take quite that long that night. It might have, but probably not. And we get out there, and the fire is burning. It's burning pretty good. The wind's out of the west, and the way that little place is situated, there's a county road on the east of it, and on the north of it is the highway. And of course the fire's coming out of the west, and they had no problem putting it out back to the west side because it's burnt. And they have the fire break on the north and somewhat of a fire break on the east. So they're working on the south side, and they do a good job. There are fire trucks everywhere out there. There's a road grader trying to make a fire break. The police are out there, the sheriff's office from Donnelly and from Wellington, the highway patrol. And the lights are flashing. And there are cowboys out there, real cowboys. Not guys like me that keep cows because I kind of enjoy them, but people who make a living on the back of a horse herding cows. And they're trying to get my cows out of that field. They've got the gate open, they've got their horses out there, and they're trying just to get them out. But there's all these lights and all these trucks, and those cows are not moving. They're down in this little circle, and the fire's coming over the hill, and they're scared. But I drive up, and we get out, and then we yell at them, and here they come on the run. And they come running, that big old bull who's been trying to mess with those horses. He's just running as hard as he can, and they follow us right out the gate, right down the road to another field. No problem. Because they recognized that voice. They recognized who we were. There was no way they were going to go with anybody else. Even though they were trying to help them, even though they were trying to drive them with horses, they weren't going to go. But when they recognized our voice, they ran with us. And they were scared that night. And they were in trouble. And that fire, like I said, that fire was coming over the hill. But when they heard the voice that they recognized, that this is the voice that brings us food. This is the voice that brings us good pastures and wheat pastures and all this. We trust this voice, and we're going to go with it. And I think when we think about it sometimes, we're a lot like those cows sometimes. Is that we look at our lives, and there are problems in our lives. And there are things, whether it is disease or war or natural disasters or just maybe it just is your life situation that may be getting you down. And we look for that voice, and we listen for the voice that we know, to follow that voice. And that's one of the things that Jesus is offering us, is that voice that we know. But when we think about that, and as we talked about, there was something about Jesus' voice that gave him authority, just by who he was. But also, think of those disciples that followed him for 3 years. They got to know him on a daily basis, and he knew them. And that's kind of like those cows. They followed my voice because they knew it. Because they had heard it over and over. And I'd spent time with them. And I think that's one of the things we want to remember. As Jesus is people who are trying to follow Jesus, that time we spend with Him, whether that's in prayer or that's in Bible study, all of that goes together to try to give us a view of where we are and to know Jesus. And as it tells us in John 17:3, that is eternal life, to know Jesus. As we look at the book of John, and we look at this idea of knowing Jesus and Him knowing us, we see that, that Jesus, all the way through, with the bread of life, I am the bread of life, that we taste, that we hear, that we see, that He touches the blind man, that we have all these senses or ways that Jesus interacted with the people. Whether it was through taste with the wine, with the bread, whether it was through touch with the blind man, whether it's through His voice or through hearing Him. We see all of those. All of those go together. And we think, all right, this is Psalm 42:1. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. As we were talking in class this morning about how sometimes the Psalms are laments, and we cry out to the Lord. And with my voice I plead for the mercy of the Lord. But we also see, this is another song, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in Him. And when we see that taste, that goes back to everything we are is dependent upon Christ. If we are in that sheepfold and we are following Christ, it takes our taste, the experience of Christ, it takes our hearing, our listening, our reading, our seeing of Christ in our lives that makes it important. Because just as those cows recognized that my voice was the voice that brought them food, the voice that could give them life when they were hungry, that's one of the things that Jesus is offering, is He offers life. And we see that all the way through. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And then we have a famous verse in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have eternal life. Again, we have that idea that Jesus is offering us life. And then we have in this passage that we read today, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And then we have it towards the end of the book of John. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name. That when we see this all the way through, and all the way through the Bible, we see that God is offering us life. That God and Jesus is offering us life. And what was the difference between the shepherd and the hired man? Is the shepherd was willing to lay down his life for the sheep because they were his sheep and he loved them. And then that same shepherd that was talking about those sheep laid down his life for us because he loved us and he loves us. Let's never forget that. That this is not just existence, but this is life, the abundant life that Jesus is offering. If we will only listen, if we will only taste, and if we will only experience Him, He is offering us life. One of the things it says is that Jesus, the shepherd, knows His sheep. And we know that He does know us. Sometimes that's a comforting thought. Sometimes it's not. But He knows us. And He is here with us. And as we talked about sharing a meal, sharing a taste, when we saw the wine in chapter 2, we see the bread with the bread of life. We see that again with Christ. Is that He is about to share a meal with us today. To share the communion with us. And let's remember that He is here with us to share with us. And I urge you to remember that He's also offering us life. Not just existence, but life, and the life abundant. If we will just listen and experience and taste the Lord. But if anyone has a particular need, if you want to put on Christ, if you need prayers, if you just need to share your abundant life with us, we want to share it with you. But if you would come forward as we stand and as we sing.